Welcome to the Andy Stanley Leadership Podcast, a conversation designed to help leaders go further faster. On today's podcast, we're going to discuss the vital role that integrity plays in the life of a leader. Andy, I think integrity is something we all know when we see it, but how do you define it?
I think the best way to understand integrity is to think of a word picture. The term integrity is used to describe the hull of a ship. From all outward appearances, it looks like the hull of this ship is sound, but then they test it and they find out it is what it appears to be. And that's what it means to have integrity personally, that we are who we appear to be. When someone has integrity, we'll find that there's alignment between what they say they believe and what they do, who they claim to be, and who they really are. Again, the closer you get, the better they look if they're a person of integrity.
I think we'd all agree that integrity is important, but a leader can accomplish quite a bit without it, right?
Yes, and that's one of the reasons this is so important, and one of the reasons this issue is so confusing, I think, especially for young leaders. When we start off in leadership, when we look at leaders who've accomplished a great deal, we see the highlight reels. We see the mountaintop experiences. We read the articles about their success. We see the interviews on television. And oftentimes, all of that is simply about accomplishment, and there's no talk of integrity. So number one, we don't hear much about it. And secondly, the truth is, in some cases, a person went further faster because they lacked integrity. And again, if they're successful financially, if they're successful in terms of building a big organization, not necessarily a great organization, it's easy to think, especially when we start out, that, integrity is a nice to have. Integrity is an add-on. Integrity is something I'm going to teach my kids. Integrity is something that will become important when I'm in my 50s and I've already established my name and I have a lot of money and I can give it away and I can sort of make up for the past. But the truth is, even though you can accomplish a lot without integrity, in fact, even though you can lead large organizations or even build a large organization without integrity, you can't be a leader worth following without integrity. And at the end of the day, that's what I think most people want to look back on. And I know it's the people who follow us, it's what they want to look back on in terms of the leader they chose to follow. So while it's true that integrity is not essential in order to lead, it is essential if a man or woman wants to be a leader worth following.
It seems like the whole lack of integrity shows up time and time again when young, talented people just get pushed into leadership because of their giftedness.
Yeah, and this is another reason this is so important. There's no correlation, and I think this is so important for those of us who are in leadership, young leaders, those of us who are developing leaders. There's no necessary correlation between talent and maturity or integrity. Mm-hmm. And the more talented a person is, the more gifted a person is, the quicker they're recognized and they're pushed into leadership positions, whether they have the maturity to sustain it or not, and whether they have the integrity to go along with it. So there's no correlation. The problem is, when I meet a very talented person, my inclination is to assume maturity on their part and to assume that they have integrity. But there's no necessary correlation. Certainly Hollywood has taught us that. But again, when it comes to, hiring, staffing, growing an organization, I think we make some dangerous assumptions. And what happens is, and we've both seen this, then we end up putting people in a position that demands integrity that they don't have, or that demands or assumes maturity that they don't have. And then when they crash and burn, we wonder, we think, but you were so talented, you were so gifted. Well, yeah, they were. But there's no correlation between talent and maturity, talent and integrity.
In some ways, it's that super talented or super gifted person that really they're set up, their success sets them up for a fall.
Yeah, because with new opportunities come new temptations. With new responsibility comes new temptation. With bigger responsibility, there's generally less accountability. So again, a person who has not done the trench work to develop an internal sense of integrity, a true north, these are the things I'll never do, these are the things I'll always do. Until a person has that, again, we push them into leadership, or because they're so talented, they gain access to more opportunity. If they don't have integrity, oftentimes the opportunities that we give them or that are given to us sweep us past our ability to manage those opportunities with integrity. Because again, there's no natural or necessary correlation between those two things.
Well, Andy, how, or I guess why, does that tend to happen?
Well, I think there's a couple of reasons. Number one, generally speaking, and this isn't always true, but generally speaking, the most direct path to success is not generally the most ethical one. The most direct path to financial success, to influence in an organization, to access to more information, whatever it might be. Oftentimes, the most direct path to those things that we that we use to measure success, oftentimes they're not the most ethical ones. So, you get a leader who's a bit type A, who's all about the future, who's all about progress. You put them in an environment where they have the opportunity to fast track themselves, up the corporate ladder or whatever it might be. And if they don't have integrity, they're going to take the shortest route. And oftentimes the shortest route is not the route that includes always telling the truth, always doing the right thing, sacrifice, learning the tough lessons the tough way. And so consequently, I think young leaders especially are set up for disaster. Lane, the irony of attempting to be a leader worth following is that your commitment to do the right thing may actually jeopardize rather than enhance your progress. That your commitment to do the right thing may actually get in the way of being able to take advantage of opportunities, or again, fast track yourself into a position where you have access to more information or influence. And so that's the rub, that's the tension, that's the place where the man or woman who's committed to being a leader worth following says, in order to maintain my soundness, in order to continue to be a person of character or integrity, I'm going to have to take the long way around. I'm going to have to say no to an opportunity. I'm going to have to miss out on a sale. I'm going to miss an opportunity to look as good as I might otherwise look to my peers. But the man or the woman of integrity is going to be willing to make those sacrifices. The person that doesn't have that depth of character is not. And this is a generalization, but I think this is probably true for just about everybody. The day will come when progress will call for compromise. I don't care what industry you're in. We've seen this in church world. We've seen this in pastoral ministry. We hear about it, read about it in the marketplace all the time. We've both talked to men and women in our congregations who find themselves at the edge of incredible opportunity, but it will call for or demand incredible compromise of conviction. And I think every single person, especially gifted leaders, the day will come when progress in their industry or in the marketplace will call for some kind of compromise that causes them or requires of them to compromise at the fundamental level of who they are. And in that moment, men and women they really discover what's most important. So whispering in one ear is that leader inside of them that says, this is your moment, this is your opportunity, you'll be golden, this is it. On the other shoulder is the voice that's whispering, but this is wrong. I mean, this isn't honest. This isn't ethical. And then the other voice is whispering, but this is how it's done in your industry. This is how it's done in the marketplace. Your father would be so proud of you. And then in the other ear, we hear the voice often of our spouse whispering, but is this the story you want to tell your children? So in that moment, our integrity is surfaced, the depth of our character is there before us, and in those moments, leaders make the decision. They determine, am I simply going to be a leader, or am I going to be a leader that's worth following? To go back to things we talked about before, am I simply going to be a leader, or am I going to be a leader that's proud to tell the story of my leadership life?
You said there were two reasons. The first, that the most direct path to leadership isn't always the most ethical. What's the second?
The second one is even more complicated, and that's simply this, that oftentimes the direct path to maintaining success isn't ethical either. This is the stage of life where we are. We've been doing what we are doing as church planners and church leaders for 17 years. In some people's minds, we're on the top of the mountain. We're always the second or third largest church in America, and there's this internal pressure, and it's totally internal, to maintain that, to maintain momentum. And this is where I see even mature leaders get into trouble. It's one thing to win the heavyweight championship of the world. It's another thing to have to maintain it. Everybody's there to cheer you on the first time around, but from that point forward, everybody's looking forward to you falling. And so it's in the daily grind, not of trying to become successful, but in trying to maintain success, that there's another slew of opportunities to compromise and to, again, walk away from the fundamental principles that in some cases got you to where you are. So if you're so fortunate to gain success in the eyes of the public or in the marketplace or in your industry or even within your organization, one day you're going to wake up and realize that what was once applauded is now expected. What was once the exception, the wow, you did it, you made it, way to go, now that's just expected. And I think, again, something begins to whisper in our ear. There's got to be more, it's got to be bigger, it's got to be better, it's got to be faster. You've got to do something to keep the crowd, win the crowd, regain that same sense of momentum. And it's in that tension that I think every leader feels, I know I do, in that tension, there are opportunities to compromise. Again, that self-conversation. Well, I'm entitled to this. Well, that really isn't all that important. Nobody's going to know. This is what's expected of me. And again, in those moments, we're faced with what we really believe, who we really are, and if we're going to continue to be sound, if we're going to continue to be men and women who not only have an opportunity to lead, but to be leaders worth following.
Andy, I've heard you compare this, leading from the front of the pack experience is almost leading under the influence.
Yeah. Success and recognition are intoxicants. I mean, it's easy to get intoxicated with success, with being recognized. You get so accustomed to that, you just want more and more and more. So consequently, in order to maintain that place in the pack, in order to maintain that same momentum again, there are going to be opportunities. In fact, it might even be required to compromise fundamentals, to compromise integrity to stay there. And again, then we're confronted with what are we going to be? Simply leaders or leaders worth following? And an intoxicated person sees the world differently.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the problem with being intoxicated. Everybody's saying it's red and you're saying, no, it's blue, because you see the world differently. And it's so dangerous. In fact, I guarantee you there's a lot of listeners today who are thinking about their boss, their manager, whoever he or she might be, and they sit around with their peers and they ask the question, how can we get him, how can we get her to see this as it really is? That somehow they become so intoxicated with their personal success, their personal notoriety, that there's a filter over the way that they see the world. And it's so frustrating for people who are following, and it's dangerous for people who are leading. And the other thing, Lane, and again, our listeners, they know that we're in ministry and they probably think we never deal with this sort of thing, but it is so common in ministry that it's embarrassing. Often for an intoxicated leader, right and wrong is for the other guy. There's something about leadership that's so intoxicating, a person begins to think, the rules that I used to follow are for people who are where I used to be. But now that I'm on top of the world, now that I see like no one else sees, now that I have more responsibility, now that I have a clearer vision of how things really are, those rules don't apply to me. And again, there are so many political illustrations. There's illustrations in the marketplace. And unfortunately, there are many illustrations of that in ministry, to where the leader becomes so intoxicated with either being successful or staying successful that they begin to think the rules don't apply to me. And it can get so bad that dishonesty is seen as prudent in light of current reality. And again, no one listening today thinks they would ever get to that place. But again, these are just sort of heads up that if you're a young leader, you're going to be called upon to compromise in order to go further faster at times. And then once you're a seasoned leader, the pressure to continue to stay at the head of the pack sets you up for a similar type temptation.
And what's true of individuals can actually be true of entire organizations.
Absolutely. This can actually characterize a culture. I think some years ago, I told the story of sitting, having dinner with several ex-Enron employees, and they began to share war stories. These were two gentlemen who had not seen each other in 4 or 5 years, and they just discovered in the course of our conversation that they both worked for Enron at different times. And I know this is such a dated illustration, but they began to just talk about the culture. And I remember interrupting, and I didn't know either of these gentlemen that well, interrupting and saying, how can that be? How can educated, smart, successful, multi-millionaire, want for nothing people make such ridiculous, unethical, organization threatening decisions? And they both just laughed and looked at me, and they said, it was the culture. So yeah, what happens to an individual can happen to an entire organization. But as you know, it begins with leadership. And people in our organizations take their cues from us. And when we begin to bend the rules, ignore the rules in order to gain success or maintain success, that's a cue that people are prone to take from us.
So what do you say to the leader who's sitting out there listening and they're on the ethical fence, who says, why should I cling to something that's just going to slow me down?
Well, as a Christian, there's a spiritual component to that question in terms of just my personal relationship with my Heavenly Father, and that spiritual sense of accountability that I think many of us carry with us to the marketplace. It's not a Sunday morning thing; it's a daily thing. But beyond that, I think there's some other things that even a person who doesn't consider themselves religious needs to factor in. As you say, they're on the fence trying to decide, okay, should I give up what is coming in my direction in order to maintain integrity that nobody in my industry or business even cares about, so to speak? And maybe the best way to describe what I'm talking about, every leader wears two badges. They're invisible badges. One is the badge of position. This is the position I have, and this is the influence that comes with my position. And the other invisible badge is the badge of moral authority. Moral authority is people are going to follow me not because of my position in the company, but because of who I am as a person. It's one thing to lead from the standpoint of position in the organization. I'm the boss, or I'm a CEO, or I'm a director, a division manager, whatever it might be. It's another thing to lead both from position and with that badge of moral authority. And when a man or woman publicly or even privately, that eventually becomes public, begins to compromise, begins to feel entitled, begins to make compromises in order to go further faster, they in most cases may be able to maintain the badge of position, but they lose their moral authority. And to be a leader worth following, it is not enough to maintain position. You've got to maintain your integrity, your moral authority, your soundness. So for the man or woman who's sitting out there right now who realizes, okay, if I go forward with what's been handed to me or offered to me, I may even get more positional authority, but I'm going to give up some moral authority. That's something to think about. So I think that's the first thing everybody needs to consider, regardless of their religious persuasion. You need to know, once you go down that road, you give up moral authority, and it is so easy to lose. In most cases, it is impossible. It is impossible to regain.
Andy, then what's the best way for leaders to guard our moral authority?
Well, I think the best way is to rephrase the question you just asked and to ask it this way. And if you're in your late 20s, 30s, even early 40s, I cannot tell you how important this question is. You need to write it down, put it on your dashboard, hide it in a drawer at work. And the question is this. It's not how do I become a leader? Because the truth is, it's giftedness, it's opportunity, it's education, it's emotional intelligence. It's all those things that help people become leaders. The better question is, how do I become a leader and continue to be a leader worth following? That's the question. How do I become and continue to be a leader that's worth following? And if we will keep that question front and center, then when we get to those forks in the road where it's, there's a red flag, it's more money, but I'm going to sacrifice my moral authority. If the question that's in front of us isn't how do I get more opportunity, how do I gain more recognition, how do I become a better leader, the question is, how do I become and continue to be a leader worth following? Then there's a filter through which we evaluate all of those decisions. I think that's how you guard your moral authority. And in addition to that question, I think there are three things, three gauges, three areas, three tensions that every leader needs to pay attention to. I say three, but there's probably 20. But when we see leaders get in trouble, it's usually around these three things. So in addition to asking the question, how do I become and continue to be a leader worth following? Here are the three things every leader needs to pay attention to, because these are the areas where they get tripped up and oftentimes lose their moral authority. Number one is their response to authority, because none of us like to be told what to do. And the older we get and the more authority we get and the more responsibility we get and the smarter we think we are, the less inclined we are to stay under authority. So I think every leader, I don't care where they are in their organization, needs to pay attention to their internal, not just their external, because we're good at covering the externals. To pay attention to their internal response to authority, because it is a twist in our view of authority that creates an entitlement mindset, and that's when we begin bending the rules. So pay attention to your internal response to authority. Secondly, how you handle money. Once again, more opportunity, more responsibility, more leadership, bigger organizations, more money. Leaders get in trouble all the time, not because they don't have enough money. That's never the issue. It's always what they do when they have more money than they've ever had before. So you got to pay attention to what you're doing with your money. And then third, the way you deal with your frustration. Because with greater leadership opportunities comes more power, more potential to kind of get bowed up, to misleverage our authority because we get angry, because we get frustrated. So pay attention to that frustration gauge and pay attention to the way you're dealing with your frustration. It's so interesting, isn't it, Lane, that when we begin in an organization and when we're first starting out with our careers, we manage our frustration so much better because we have to. Right. We dare not lose our temper. We dare not talk down to people. We're on our best behavior, and then something strange happens. We become successful, and it's like, we don't have to do that anymore. But see, that's that twist. That's that entitlement mindset. I don't have to be kind. I don't have to be patient. Well, again, that's a gauge we all need to pay attention to, because that's an area where sometimes, and where oftentimes, leaders lose their moral authority, their influence beyond their position in the organization.
You know, Andy, for years, I've heard you reference, it's just a simple prayer that you've prayed with your kids every night that I think really goes to the heart of this.
Yeah, and I don't know when I began doing this. I know my kids were so young, they don't remember the first time, and I don't either. And, as a parent, you're always trying to find ways to simplify complex things to get them into the heart of your children. And so we began to pray as a family, and I pray probably every single day this simple prayer: Lord, give me the wisdom to know what's right and the courage to do what's right, even when it's hard. Give me the wisdom to know what's right. That's the fork in the road. And the courage to do what's right, even when it's hard. And that dilemma, that tension never, ever goes away. The stakes get higher. But give me the wisdom to know what's right, then give me the courage to do what's right, even when it's hard. And I think for those in our podcast audience who are praying people, who believe in a higher power, or like we do, who believe in a personal God, I think that's a cry for help. It's an expression of humility. It's a way of saying, I don't have all the answers. I may have more fame and success and more money and more people following me than ever before, but every single day I need the wisdom to know what's right. I need the courage to do what's right, especially when it's hard.
Andy, thanks for spending this time with us today, and thank you to all of our listeners for joining us. For more leadership content, visit InsideNorthPoint.org. That's InsideNorthPoint.org.